How about this, folks? My wife thought I was cheating on her, so she cheated on me as revenge. Sounds crazy, right? I mean, sure, I work a lot. I'm a surgeon, always on call, always at the hospital, surrounded by nurses, doctors, and patients. But I never strayed. Not once. I never gave her a reason to doubt me. And yet, somehow, in her mind, I became the bad guy. One day, she was my wife, my best friend, my entire world, and the next, she was a stranger. And what did I do when I found out? I did what any self-respecting man should do. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the beginning of this insane story. My name is Dr. Mark Carter, and for 10 years, I thought I had the perfect marriage with my wife, Emily. She wasn't just my wife, she was my best friend. The one person I could always count on. The one who made all the late nights and long shifts worth it. We met in college. She was an art student, always covered in paint, always working on some wild, creative project. I was a med student, surviving on caffeine and stress, buried in textbooks, chasing a dream that felt impossible some days. She brought lightness into my life. I was the guy with my head down, always focused on the future, while she was the one who reminded me to live in the moment. We balanced each other. It didn't take long for me to know she was the one. We got married young. People warned us, said it was too soon, that we were too caught up in the romance of it all. But we knew what we wanted. We wanted a home of our own, a place that felt like us. We found a modest little house on a quiet street. Not fancy, not big, but perfect. It had a front porch where Emily kept her plants, a huge oak tree in the backyard, and enough space for her to have her own art studio in one of the spare bedrooms. She painted. I worked. Life was simple, and we were happy. We talked about traveling the world one day, Italy, Japan, Greece. We talked about having kids. Maybe 2, maybe 3. We made plans for the future, always assuming it would be us against the world. And for years, it felt like it would be. When I became a surgeon, I knew life wasn't going to be easy. Late nights, long shifts, the kind of exhaustion that never really goes away. I was always on call, always needed at the hospital. Some weeks, I worked 70, 80 hours, running on nothing but coffee and sheer willpower. It wasn't just a job, it was a responsibility. People's lives were in my hands. Emily told me she understood. She told me she was proud of me. She told me she knew I was doing this for us, for the life we were building. And for a long time, I believed her. The little moments that mattered. Even with my insane schedule, I tried. I always made sure we had Sunday mornings together, breakfast, coffee, sitting on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. I left her little notes when I knew I'd be home late. I planned weekend trips whenever I could, even if it meant rearranging my shifts. Because no matter how much I loved my job, Emily always came first. At least, that's what I thought. Looking back, I wonder if she ever really felt that way. I started noticing the change in Emily a few months ago. It wasn't obvious at first. Nothing dramatic. No big fights, no sudden shifts that would make a guy sit up and go, something's wrong here. It was gradual, like a house settling on a cracked foundation, quiet, steady, and almost invisible until the damage was already done. I'd walk through the door after a 14-hour shift, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck, expecting to see her waiting for me. Instead, I'd find her sitting at the kitchen table, barely looking up. How was work? She'd ask, her voice clipped. Tough. 2 back-to-back surgeries. Instead of sympathy, instead of the usual, that sounds brutal. Are you okay? I'd get a short nod in silence. At first, I told myself she was just stressed. Maybe work was getting to her. Maybe she was feeling lonely with me being gone so much. So I tried. I asked about her day, tried to make conversation, even when I was dead on my feet. But the answers were short, distant. Like she was just going through the motions, like she was sitting across from me but wasn't really there. And then I started noticing the other things. Emily had never been secretive with her phone. She'd leave it lying on the kitchen counter, on the nightstand, face up without a second thought. Sometimes, when she got a text, she'd even ask me to grab it and read it to her. But now, it was always face down. When it buzzed, she'd glance at it quickly and flip it over. If I walked into the room while she was using it, she'd lock the screen instantly, tucking it under her leg or setting it aside. And when she got calls, she'd step into another room. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was just talking to a friend about something personal. But when it became a habit, when she never answered a call in front of me anymore, I felt something I hadn't in our entire marriage. Doubt. It wasn't just the phone. She stopped asking about my day, stopped checking in to see if I was okay after long shifts, stopped sitting next to me when we watched TV, started choosing the chair instead of the couch, like she needed space from me. And the worst part? I felt like I was the only one trying. I'd come home with her favorite takeout, hoping to surprise her, only to get a distracted smile and a half-hearted thanks before she went back to scrolling on her phone. I'd ask her if she wanted to go out for dinner, maybe take a weekend trip somewhere, and she'd just shrug. I don't know. I'm kind of tired. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She was just gone. Like the woman I married had been replaced by someone who didn't care anymore. Emily had never been much of a party girl. Sure, she had friends, and they'd go out every once in a while, but she was always the type to prefer a quiet night at home. That changed. She started going out more, something she never used to do. At first, it was once a week, then twice, then 3 times. And it wasn't like before, when she'd meet up with her best friend for dinner and be home by 10. Now, she was getting dressed up, wearing outfits I hadn't seen in years, and staying out until midnight, sometimes later. Where are you headed? I'd ask as she grabbed her purse. She'd shrug. Out with friends. Which friends? Just friends, Mark. Do I have to run my plans by you now? I wasn't interrogating her. I wasn't trying to control her. I just wanted to know. I wanted to understand why she was suddenly living a life that didn't include me. She never gave me a straight answer. And that feeling, that gnawing, twisting feeling in my gut, started growing. I wasn't home much, but when I was, I always made it a point to crawl into bed beside her, no matter how exhausted I was. Even if I barely had the energy to keep my eyes open, I'd pull her close, feel the warmth of her beside me, and remind myself that no matter how hard the day was, I had her. That changed, too. I'd come home after a long shift and find her already in bed, facing away from me, barely mumbling a hey before turning over. Some nights, she wasn't there at all. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. to find the other side of the bed empty, the house silent except for the occasional sound of her pacing downstairs. I'd find her sitting at the kitchen table, phone in her hands, staring at the screen like it held some kind of answer. Emily, I'd mumble, rubbing my eyes. She'd jump, locking her phone before looking up at me like I'd caught her doing something she shouldn't. I couldn't sleep, she'd say. I was too tired to argue. I'd just nod, tell her to come to bed, and pretend not to notice the way her hands shook as she set her phone down. I told myself we were just going through a rough patch, that maybe I just needed to be home more, pay more attention, make more of an effort. So I tried. I asked her if she wanted to go away for the weekend, just the 2 of us. She hesitated. I don't know. I've got a lot going on. A lot going on with what? Another shrug. Just stuff. I stood there, staring at her, trying to understand. Emily, do you even want to be here anymore? She looked up at me then. For a second, something flashed across her face, something like guilt. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. I don't know what you want me to say, Mark. And that was it. Emily had decided that I was cheating on her. I didn't know it at the time. I didn't realize that in her mind, she had already put the pieces together. Pieces that didn't actually fit. Pieces that only made sense if you were looking for something that wasn't there. She had convinced herself that my late nights, my exhaustion, my unread texts weren't because of surgeries, emergencies, or the long hours that came with being a surgeon. No, in her head, those were just excuses, a cover for something worse. And once she had that idea in her mind, there was no getting it out. I don't know when it started. I can only guess. Maybe it was the first time she felt that pang of doubt when I walked through the door too late, too tired, unable to do anything but grab a quick meal and sit in silence. Maybe it was the moment she saw a text on my phone that I had forgotten to respond to, a nurse checking in about a patient, an assistant confirming my surgery schedule. Maybe it was nothing at all, just a creeping insecurity she couldn't shake, something that festered in the quiet moments when she was alone at home, staring at the empty side of the bed. But whatever it was, she started watching me, and she wasn't subtle about it. At first, it was just little things. The way she stared at me when she thought I wasn't looking. The way she asked, "What time are you getting home tonight?" in a tone that felt less like curiosity and more like a test. The way she started memorizing my schedule, not because she was interested in my work, but because she was keeping track of me. And then, it escalated. I always left my phone on the nightstand when I got home. There was nothing to hide, nothing I ever thought twice about. But one morning, I woke up and noticed something strange. My phone was moved. Not far, just a little to the side, the angle slightly different than how I usually left it. At first, I thought maybe I had just bumped it in my sleep. But then I noticed the screen was smudged, like someone had been scrolling through it. A weird feeling settled in my stomach, but I didn't say anything. I unlocked my phone, checked my messages, my calls. Nothing was different. Nothing missing, no notifications cleared. If she had gone through it, she hadn't found anything. Because there was nothing to find. And yet, that didn't stop her from checking again. I didn't realize it at first. I mean, why would I? Who expects their own wife to be tailing them like some kind of private investigator? But one night, I left the hospital late, really late. It had been one of those shifts that dragged on forever, a complicated surgery that took longer than expected. By the time I finally got to my car, I was running on fumes. I sat there for a moment, keys in my hand, just trying to gather myself before driving home. I had my phone in my lap, staring at a message from one of the nurses about a post-op patient. Nothing urgent, nothing that couldn't wait until morning. I sighed, rubbed my eyes, and put my head back against the seat. That's when I saw it. A car, parked a little too far from the hospital entrance, engine running, lights off. Something about it felt off. I couldn't explain it. At first, I thought maybe it was another doctor catching a quick break, or a patient's family member waiting for news. But as I sat there, something in my gut told me I was being watched. So I reached for my keys, started my car, and pulled out of the parking lot. The car didn't move right away, but a few seconds later, it followed. I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror as I drove. The car stayed behind me, not too close, but always there. And then, as I turned onto our street, it slowed down. I pulled into our driveway and watched as the car kept going, disappearing into the night. It was her car. Emily had followed me. I didn't confront her right away. I didn't know how. What was I supposed to say? Hey, did you stalk me at work last night? So I waited. I watched. And sure enough, over the next few weeks, the signs were everywhere. She'd ask me where I had been, even when she already knew. She'd check the time on the microwave when I walked in, like she was tracking how long it had taken me to get home. She'd mention things that she shouldn't have known, little details about my shift, the exact time I left the hospital, things I hadn't told her. That's when I understood. In her mind, she had caught me. To her, watching me sit in my car at night, exhausted after a shift, meant I was stalling, maybe deleting messages, maybe waiting for someone. To her, my unread texts weren't from nurses, patients, hospital staff. They were from someone else. She had created an entire story in her head, one where I was the villain. And nothing I said or did was going to change that. She stopped talking to me. Not completely. Just enough to make it clear that she was done trying to pretend. Dinner became silent. Conversations were short. She no longer asked me about my day, and when I asked about hers, she gave me one-word answers. The coldness between us felt like something solid, something real. And yet, I had no idea what I was even being punished for. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even confused anymore. I was just tired. Tired of feeling like I had to prove myself to my own wife. Tired of walking into my own house and feeling like I didn't belong there anymore. Tired of watching Emily look at me like a stranger. She had already made up her mind about me. I just didn't know what she planned to do next. Once I came home after an 18-hour shift, completely drained. The kind of exhaustion that sinks into your bones, that makes you feel like you've been running for miles with no finish line in sight. I just wanted to take a shower, eat something, and collapse into bed next to my wife. But when I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. Her car wasn't there. The house was dark. Emily wasn't home. I stood in the doorway for a moment, staring at the quiet, empty space. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No messages. Just silence. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. She had been going out more lately. I knew that. Maybe she had just lost track of time. Maybe she was at a friend's house. But then I looked at the clock. 11:42 p.m. And something in my gut told me this wasn't just another night out. I heated up leftovers, but I barely touched them. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the front door, waiting. Minutes crawled by. Every time I heard a car pass, I looked up, expecting it to be her. But the minutes turned into an hour. Then 2. By the time I checked my phone again, it was past 2 a.m. I should have gone to bed. But I couldn't. Because for the first time in our marriage, I had no idea where my wife was. And she wasn't telling me. The sound of gravel crunching under tires pulled me from my thoughts. I looked up just as the headlights swept across the living room window. Her car rolled into the driveway. I sat there, frozen, listening as the engine cut off. A few seconds later, the front door opened. Emily stepped inside, her keys jingling as she tossed them onto the table by the door. She didn't even look at me. She just walked straight past the kitchen toward the stairs, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Emily. She stopped but didn't turn around. I stood up slowly, my hands gripping the edge of the table. Where were you? She let out a breath, almost like she was annoyed. Out. That was it. Just one word, like it was all the explanation I needed. I took a step closer. She was still facing away from me, her shoulders stiff, her arms wrapped around herself like she was bracing for something. I opened my mouth to speak, but then I smelled it. The sharp, lingering scent of alcohol and something else. Something that didn't belong to her. It clung to her clothes, her hair. It was faint, but it was there. I felt my chest tighten. Emily. She turned slightly, just enough for me to see her face. Her makeup was smudged. Her hair was a little messy, like she had been running her hands through it all night. I reached for her, needing that connection, needing something to ground me in that moment. She pulled away. Not in an obvious, dramatic way. Just a small movement, a flinch, like my touch was something she couldn't handle. And that was when something inside me broke. She walked past me, heading toward the stairs. I'm tired, Mark. Her voice was flat, distant, like we were nothing more than roommates who had run out of things to say to each other. I should have let her go. I should have turned around and walked away, given myself time to think. But instead, I followed her. Emily, what's going on? She sighed but didn't stop. I don't want to do this right now. I felt my patience snap. You don't want to do this? Emily, you disappeared for hours, ignored my calls, came home smelling like. I stopped myself, my own words catching in my throat. She finally turned to face me. Like what? She asked, her eyes locked onto mine. I stared at her, searching her face for any sign of regret, any flicker of guilt. But all I saw was coldness. Like she had already made peace with whatever had happened tonight. I felt my heart start to pound. Emily. My voice was quieter now, almost pleading. Tell me the truth. She just shook her head. Good night, Mark. And then she walked upstairs, leaving me standing there, alone, in the dark, wondering if the woman I had built my life with was even the same person anymore. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. Emily became even more distant. She had already been pulling away, but now it was different. It wasn't just silence at dinner or avoiding my eyes when I asked how her day was. It was coldness, like she had already checked out of our marriage. She stopped kissing me goodbye in the mornings. Stopped saying I love you before bed. Stopped texting to check in, even when she knew I was working late. At first, I told myself it was just leftover tension from the night she came home late. Maybe she was still mad about me asking questions. Maybe she just needed time. But time didn't fix anything. It only made it worse. I started paying closer attention. I noticed how she guarded her phone even more than before. She never left it on the counter anymore. It was always with her, always face down. When I walked into her room, she'd subtly tilt the screen away from me, like she didn't want me to see. If I asked who she was texting, she'd shrug. Just friends. If I asked which friends, she'd get defensive. Why do you care so much? And that was the thing. I didn't care about her having friends. I had never cared. She had always had her own life, her own people outside of our marriage, and that was fine. But this was different. She was hiding something. I just didn't know what. One night, she told me she was meeting up with some girlfriends for dinner. Fine. Normal. No problem. I asked where they were going. She hesitated. Just for a second. That new Italian place downtown. I nodded. A few hours later, I was on my way home from the hospital when I passed by that same Italian place. I glanced at the parking lot. Her car wasn't there. Maybe they had already left. Maybe they changed plans. I tried to shake it off, tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. But that feeling didn't go away. Because when she came home that night, I asked how dinner was. Good. What did you get? Another hesitation. Pasta. I waited. She didn't offer any details. No mention of her friends, no funny story from the night, nothing. Just pasta. Like she was giving me just enough to keep me from asking more. I woke up in the middle of the night. The bed felt too empty, too cold. I reached for Emily, but she wasn't there. For a second, I thought maybe she had gone to get a glass of water. But then I heard it. A soft whisper coming from the bathroom. The door was slightly open, just enough for me to see the glow of her phone screen. I heard her voice, low, urgent. No, he's asleep. I can't talk now. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't get up. I didn't confront her. Because deep down, I already knew. I couldn't pretend anymore. A few nights later, I was sitting at the kitchen table when she walked in, dropping her purse on the counter like it weighed 100 pounds. She had just come home from another late night out. No explanation, no text to say where she had been, just hours of silence before strolling in like nothing was wrong. She barely looked at me. "You're up late?" she muttered, grabbing a glass from the cupboard. I watched her pour herself some water, taking slow sips like she was stalling. "Yeah," I said. Figured I'd wait up for my wife. She didn't respond. She just leaned against the counter, avoiding my eyes. I let the silence stretch between us, thick and heavy, until finally, I said the words that had been burning in the back of my throat for weeks. "Emily, are you cheating on me?" She froze. Her fingers tightened around the glass, her knuckles turning white. For a second, she didn't speak. Then, slowly, she set the glass down on the counter and turned to face me. Her expression twisted, anger flashing across her face like a match being struck. "Are you seriously asking me that?" she snapped. "After everything you've done?" I blinked. "What the hell are you talking about?" She let out a short, bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Don't act like you don't know." I stared at her, genuinely confused. "Emily, I don't know what you're talking about." She folded her arms, her body tense, her jaw clenched. "I saw the texts, Mark." Her voice shook with pure fury. "Last night was unforgettable." "Who is she?" I frowned. "What? Don't lie to me," she yelled. Her voice cracked, her breathing uneven. "I saw the message. You didn't even try to hide it." She pulled out her phone, unlocking it with shaking hands, scrolling through something before shoving the screen in my face. And there it was. A message, clear as day. "Last night was unforgettable. I can't wait for more." My name wasn't on it. It wasn't sent from my number, but I recognized it instantly. I let out a slow breath, reaching for my own phone. Without a word, I scrolled through my messages and handed it to her. She snatched it from my hand, her eyes darting across the screen. I saw at the moment the color drained from her face. The name she thought belonged to my mistress, belonged to my surgical assistant. The message? A nurse congratulating me on a successful operation. A little girl had been rushed into surgery the night before. A high-risk case, one of the hardest I had ever done. And we had saved her life. That was what the message was about. Not some secret affair. Not some other woman. Just my job. Just the thing I had sacrificed everything for, including my marriage. Emily stared at the screen, her lips parted slightly, her face pale. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled up, seeing the rest of the conversation, messages about the surgery, about how grateful the family was, about how exhausted I had been afterward. Her breathing hitched. "No," she whispered. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, watching as reality crashed down on her. She had accused me of cheating. She had spent months convinced that I was the villain. She had let paranoia and doubt destroy our marriage. And in revenge, she had done the very thing she hated me for. She had betrayed me, not because I had done anything wrong, but because she thought I had. And now? Now there was no going back. I sat there, staring at Emily as the silence stretched between us. The phone was still in her hand, her fingers clutching it so tightly it looked like it was going to crack. Her breathing was uneven, her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. But there was nothing to say. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. My voice came out low, unsteady. "You thought I was sneaking around, so you went and did it first?" She flinched. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I thought, she stammered, shaking her head as if she could somehow make it all disappear. But she couldn't. She had destroyed us for nothing. I let out a slow breath, pressing my palms against the table, trying to ground myself. "You didn't even ask me, Emily." My voice sounded hollow, like it belonged to someone else. "You just assumed." She took a shaky step toward me, reaching out like she could fix this with a touch, like she could pull me back before I was too far gone. I stepped back. Her hand hung in the air between us before she let it drop to her side. Her face crumpled. But I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't feel anything at all. I had always imagined that if something like this ever happened, I would feel rage. That if Emily ever betrayed me, if she ever did the one thing I never thought she was capable of, I would see red. That I would yell, break something, demand to know why. But standing there in front of her, seeing the way her body shook, the way she was crumbling under the weight of her own mistake, I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just emptiness. Because at that moment, I knew one thing for certain. I could never trust her again. Emily had spent months convincing herself that I was cheating. She had followed me, checked my phone, built an entire story in her head that never happened. And instead of just asking me, instead of confronting me like a grown adult, she had gone out and done the very thing she accused me of. She had looked me in the eyes for months, knowing what she had done, knowing what she had thrown away, and said nothing. I thought back to all the nights she had come home late, to the smell of alcohol and something I had ignored because I didn't want to believe it. I thought about the way she had pulled away from me in the kitchen, the way she had flinched at my touch, the way she had been lying straight to my face, over and over again. And I realized something. I didn't know this woman anymore. The Emily I had married, the one who had been my best friend, my partner, the person I had built my entire life with, was gone. And in her place stood a woman I didn't recognize. A woman who had betrayed me for nothing. I didn't move, didn't say anything. I just watched as she stood there, shifting from foot to foot like she was waiting for me to say something to fix this. But I wasn't going to. I had spent years being the one to fix things, to make the effort, to be patient and understanding. Not this time. Not after this. Emily swallowed hard. Mark, I held up a hand. Her mouth snapped shut. Don't, I said quietly. And then, without another word, I turned and walked away. After a while, I left the divorce papers on the table. Emily was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her face red from crying. Her eyes were swollen, dark circles beneath them, like she hadn't slept all night. I stood there for a second, watching her. A part of me wondered if she had finally realized what she had done, if the weight of it had finally sunk in. But it didn't matter anymore. It was too late. She looked up at me, and for the first time in weeks, her eyes weren't filled with anger or suspicion. Just fear. Mark, please, she whispered. We can fix this. There was nothing left to fix. I shook my head. No, we can't. Her breath hitched. You don't mean that. But I did. I meant every word. You didn't trust me, Emily, I said, my voice calm, steady. And now, I can't trust you. She shook her head, gripping the edges of the blanket like it was the only thing keeping her together. It was a mistake, she pleaded. I wasn't thinking, I thought you. You thought wrong, I cut in. And you didn't even ask me. You just decided I was guilty. Her face crumpled, but I didn't feel anything. Not sympathy. Not regret. Nothing. Because I was done. I picked up my coat, grabbed my keys, and walked toward the door. I heard her get up behind me, heard the way her breath hitched like she was about to beg. Mark, please. I stopped, but I didn't turn around. You ruined our marriage because of the lies you told yourself. Now live with it. And if you resist, I'll leave you with nothing, I said. Then I opened the door, stepped outside, and closed it behind me. And just like that, it was over. Sometimes, the real betrayal isn't what you think it is. And sometimes, there's no going back. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you were in Mark's shoes, would you have walked away immediately, or would you have tried to rebuild the marriage? If you liked the story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.